And we are live. So this live stream, Jarrell Miller, Lucas Browne, their fight in Dubai. So wherever you are, morning, noon or night, thank you for joining another Boxing Squared live stream, especially if you're listening back on archive. This is the post-fight review and some comment on some of the aftermath. Randomly, Mahmoud Charr was in the ring there, and he was calling Jarrell Miller out afterwards. But we had a situation where this was a fun fight. Jarrell Miller, Lucas Browne. It promised to be a little bit sort of circus, and it was. We largely had a very entertaining and fun slugfest, and Lucas Browne comes out on at the wrong end of things. Jarrell Miller getting the stoppage in the 6th round. So what we'll do is we'll quickly talk through some of the action, because there were spurts in the fight where it was wild, especially in round 4. But it was a case that it seemed to be Lucas Browne was early on. And then later, after Miller really went for it in the 4th round, he basically took the next round and a half off. But fun fight. Jarrell Miller, he moves on. He made some comments after the fight, which we'll get to. But it was an evening opening round. And we'll just say Gareth, L-Dub, Darren's, Ricky Jones, Gines, E.T., Unger, and... it's also far 27 in the chat, wherever you are, morning, noon or night. Thank you for joining another Boxing Squared live stream. So thank you one and all for joining. Jeffrey just joined the chat as well. You've got a lot of people saying hello. Unger saying it was a juicy fight. It really was. It was a pretty even opening round. Feeling out process. Lucas Browne, I thought, took that round. He landed, I thought, the more sort of eye-catching shots. There was a decent uppercut in there. But I thought we had Jarrell Miller starting to do Jarrell Miller things and coming forward, trying to wear Lucas Browne down in round 2 and 3. And he'd made a prediction ahead of the fight that he was going to stop Browne within 4 rounds. And he tried to come good on that, especially at the end of round 4. The final 20-25 seconds of that, absolutely wild. He caught Browne with some good shots, and then both of them just let their hands go. And I was thinking one or both of them are going to be very tired coming up for round 5. And seemingly it was Miller who was worse for wear. I mean, 332-pound frame, understandable. I mean, there have been questions ahead of this fight from fans going, what sort of arrangements were in place for drug testing? So certainly a question. But Miller effectively tried to take round 5 off, recover, get some gas back in the tank. And he tried to sort of steal the round towards the end, coming on strong sort of in the final minute. But it was a Lucas Browne round. But round 6, a succession of right hands has Jarrell Miller backing up Lucas Browne, and ultimately Browne, under the pressure, and he looked tired from about round 2 onwards, he goes down. The referee lets him have the count. Browne beats it. He says yes, he's okay to continue, and Miller's all over him like white on rice and swarms him. The referee has no option but to jump in. But fair play to Lucas Browne. Took a lot of shots in there tonight. Probably didn't need that for the extra CTE he's probably going to get from it. Jarrell Miller, if he was a bigger puncher, probably would have got Browne out of there earlier. I mean, I would sort of sum it up and say it was a very fun fight. There was no head movement. There was no real defense from either. But it was, at times, just an all-out slugfest. And we knew that basically what we were going to get to some extent was these guys were going to go at it at different points in the fight. And that's exactly what we got. So from my perspective, this one delivered in terms of the entertainment front. As it is, Lucas Browne's a bit of a mixed bag with the performances he sort of throws in. But against this slightly lighter punching Jarrell Miller, he was in there. But you know, he did look tired early on, and there were a lot of arm punches coming in. And like I say, no defense, no head movement. It was all wearing shots all the time. There were a few occasions where Lucas Browne landed some nice shots, but Miller's chin just didn't really sort of seem to even buckle at all. There were a couple of occasions where Miller also landed shots to the body, left hooks to the body, and you could see Browne wince and react to it. So he certainly is vulnerable to the body, but ultimately a succession of right hands puts Browne down in the 6th, and the referee has to jump in after he beats the count with Miller all over him. So what I'll do before I get back to the chat is we'll just talk about what happened after the fight, because there were some comments from Jarrell Miller, and then you had Mahmoud Charr. See, he was on the periphery inside the ring, and I was like, oh, what's this clown doing? He's going to call Miller out, and he did. So after Miller and Browne had done their interviews, which I'll get to in a moment, you had Charr coming up and calling out Jarrell Miller. And he said to him, we can fight for the WBA championship. And Miller pointed out, and very correctly, that Mahmoud Charr does not hold a ranking and does not hold a belt. Although he is taking legal action as a result of, him not getting that fight with Trevor Bryan a couple of years in a row. Not sure where that's all out. But the thing is, he doesn't hold a belt. He's Mr. Irrelevant, and he really hasn't been a factor in the division for several years. He started to go on, I fought Povetkin, I fought Klitschko. Didn't say that he took an absolute pounding in those fights, and that was basically 10 years. The fact that Jarrell Miller will beat Mahmoud Charr, this version of him, who was never a really good version. So, I mean, when you look at the potential ranked within the WBA, I think one was 9, one was 10. So this fight will give Jarrell Miller some upward momentum in those rankings, but probably not enough to do anything. You currently have a mandatory challenger in Daniel Dubois who's waiting for Alexander Usyk. And even if there's a case where Usyk and Fury fight and Dubois is waiting, he's injured at the moment anyway, it's probably not going to be Miller. So Miller's kind of yelling into the wind here, and it's just not going to really lead to anything. So Mahmoud Charr and Jarrell Miller kind of feels like the right sort of fight, because it is a bit circus, and maybe we can get Charr sort of out of the division, because if he takes one more loss, I mean, it's probably it for him. As it is, he seems to be, I saw a photo the other day, he was on a rooftop with Christopher Lovejoy, and I thought, okay, well, that's interesting, but Charr's not really up to much. And even that fight against Lovejoy was a farce. He really hasn't been fighting or doing anything since he randomly had that WBA regular title put on the line for the Alexander Ustinov fight all the way back in 2017. Never defended the belt. Well, what a clown. So, I mean, it kind of feels like that's the fight that they would look to make. But also, Miller, with his backing, all that sort of stuff, what opportunities are there? There's not a lot really out there for Jarrell Miller right now. So Charr kind of seems like just enough of a randomness with some name recognition to kind of go, okay, this could work. And it probably would be in the same venue in Dubai with the same people. So it's hardcore boxing promotions. They seem to be putting on this card, and it was a pretty luxury sort of spread and that sort of stuff. Very few fans in the building. Hard to say how they were looking to make money out of this event. But it is what it is. I guess we can speculate on that. Maybe there's some washing of. But Miller, he's back. He already has a ranking. He's going to go higher in the rankings. But it's hard to sort of see a path to a meaningful fight at this point. And let's be clear, Mahmoud Charr versus Jarrell Miller is not a meaningful fight. But it's another sort of circus element type fight, which I would find incredibly entertaining, would be prepared to watch, just as I was with this one. Lucas Browne, in his post-fight comments, said, he will look to regroup now, that he is going to go again, and that he does feel that he's got a few more fights. I think if Miller was a bigger puncher, Browne would have taken a lot more punishment, because Browne was standing up to a lot of the punishment being dealt out, but Miller, comparatively to some of the heavy hitters, doesn't punch as hard. But Lucas Browne, 43 years old, hard to sort of see where he goes from here. Jarrell Miller, like I say, we'll see. What sort of drug testing was in place for this fight? That's certainly been a question I've been having and sort of ruminating on this week. And I guess others have been as well. Probably those urine samples might have been looking a bit purple or something like that. But one thing I would say, I thought it was a bit disingenuous of the commentary team to basically say Miller's been out for 4 years on drug bans. It doesn't really tell the whole story. It was kind of almost like some sort of sympathy thing for him. It was a really weird narrative they were sort of pulling. But if people forgot, he failed multiple tests ahead of what would have been an Anthony Joshua fight, but he was never effectively banned. He was just dropped from the... he only got banned after he failed a test against what would have been, I think it was the Jerry Forrest fight in 2020. But because he was licensed for that fight with the Nevada Commission. But anyway, that's kind of by the by, but it sort of seems like some sort of reinventing of the narrative for Miller. The guy's failed multiple tests on multiple occasions, even one way back earlier in his career. So we have to be careful when discussing him, because there just are these failed tests, and it kind of is what it is. It's not a poor Jarrell Miller he failed to test. But of Miller in the performance, he looked okay. I mean, it wasn't sort of what you would call, inverted commas, prime Miller, but he was able to take the shots and ultimately take the fight here. He was in control of, I would say, the majority of the rounds, except for round 5 where he took off, and round 1 was pretty even. But round 2 and round 3 was more sort of prime Miller. But he's got to shave off some beef. 332 pounds, gee, that's not going to work. He's got to be coming down. I mean, previously when he was, on the substances, he used to say when he dropped down to, I think it was 283 for the Vuck fight, he felt weak in there. But clearly it does hinder him and his gas tank. We're just assuming that he was clean for this fight, no guarantees. He looked like, especially after he let his hands go at the end of round 4, that was just too much. Prime Miller, with inverted commas, would have kept coming. He probably would have got Lucas Browne out of there in 3 or 4 rounds. But he's older, he's heavier, and maybe he's just not as good anymore. But still, it was an okay performance, but we have to go, well, he was facing a 43-year-old Lucas Browne, and it's been a bit of a mixed bag on what sort of performances you can expect. But Browne, he battled back at times, but he looked tired from round 2. There was a lot of arm punches, but look, it was a fun fight. I'll say that. It was a slugfest at times, no head movement, no defense, and you had a case that these guys were just going back and forth. And it was enjoyable. It was what it was, and thankfully ProBox was showing the card. So if you had a subscription, and if you're in the US or Australia or using a VPN, you could watch it. But you had to have, so I guess it was kind of almost like a pay-per-view in some extent, because you already had to have had the 12-month subscription in place, which is, I think for me, because I got it May last year, about $30. Anyway, we'll get to the comments here. I've got to scroll back up here. So, Stuck in Kiev says, great fight. When Browne got tired and left his left hand at his waist, it was written on the wall. I was just surprised he went as long as he did, because he was taking a lot of shots clean. But then again, Millet, not a huge puncher. Connor says, big up Boxing Squid, big up to yourself. Dave says, gutted I missed it. How'd the fight go? It was entertaining. I enjoyed it. It exceeded my expectations. I mean, I didn't really know what to expect. I mean, Miller's been out in terms of, named competition and guys that are punchers. He hasn't fought a puncher in forever, so who knew what was going to happen? His chin held up to what Browne had to throw at it, but Browne got pretty tired pretty quickly. But it was fun. ET says he missed it. He couldn't find a stream. True says, don't forget to hit like. Yes, thank you. Wherever you are, morning, noon, or night, thank you. Joining the Boxing Squared live stream. I do appreciate it. And we'll get to Blue Collar Sports TV with the super chat. Thank you very much for that. He says, salute, brother. Fun fight for what it was. I'd take Miller over Dubois, to be honest. It'd be interesting, because Miller, with his durability, he is a guy who can just soak up punishment, and Dubois, he sort of seems to be on the point of disaster sometimes. That Lorena fight sort of proved that out. It would be interesting. I just don't know if it's realistic. Unga says, ProBox TV YouTube channel. I don't think they'll be putting it up on there, because it was effectively like a pay-per-view for this one. Adore Pennant says, Jarrell Miller versus Murat Gassiev would be fireworks. It would be. I kind of think if Charr was in there after the fight, there's probably already some sort of loose agreement for that fight to happen, because it felt like manufactured beef. I mean, who really wants to see it? I mean, but it was kind of like this fight with Lucas Browne. It was random. There was no demand for it. No one was calling for it. It just sort of got made, and it was like, oh, okay, well, this is kind of interesting and intriguing. Browne is pretty washed, but he's got, power, and Miller, who knows what he had left if he's off the PEDs, etc. So, I mean, I liked, the look of this fight, and, even though Charr is a bit of a joke and a clown, I'll still watch that, and I will pay to see a Jarrell Miller retire Mahmoud Charr. Force Ghost Fabio says, a BS live chat, we're so blessed. Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I was about to make a video, and I was like, actually, this sort of fight, what it was, I wanted to, just sort of have a bit of interaction and that sort of stuff. So Glenn says, fun fight, Miller just a bit too strong. Yeah, True says, I want to see Miller fight someone who can spark him out. Wilder will do for me. I think there's plenty of people who would like to see Miller get sparked out there. Dave says, get him in there with Joe Joyce. I mean, if Joyce has to continue to wait for a shot, you know, at guys like Fury and Usyk or whatever, a Miller-type name for Joe Joyce is not a bad option, but Miller doesn't have a WBO ranking. He's ranked in the WBA, and seemingly that's the path that he wants to go. And Miller would probably also, because he's calling out the big names, he wanted Anthony Joshua. He's never going to get that fight. He can call for it all he wants, but he wants a payday. You know, his stupidity saw him drop millions of dollars, you know, from taking PEDs a few years ago. He's got to make that back up. His promoters want to make that back up. There was actually, a while ago, Dimitri Salita was taking Jarrell Miller to court because of what had happened. So I don't know what ended up happening with that, but they need to get their money and their investment back on Jarrell Miller, who clearly has, you know, obviously dicked them over a couple of times. Miller versus Takam could work. That's not a bad fight, but who's paying for that? But then again, who was paying for this fight card? You got to admit, you got to say it probably wasn't cheap to get Browne and also Miller to headline in some random card in Dubai. So, I mean, if someone's going to put up the money, maybe it could work. Miller versus Tom Schwartz. I think Tom Schwartz is just so terrible. It's just not worth it. He's domestic German level at least. At best, I should say. Hulk Mode says, Big Baby Miller versus Joe Joyce is pay-per-view. That's the sort of fight, though, that Miller would be like, there's no money in it. And he wouldn't take it, I don't think. But I would like that fight. Adare Pennant says, Mahmoud Charr needs to move out of the way forever and retire from boxing forever. I'll second that one. True says, GL to Leon Edwards tonight. Good luck to Leon Edwards tonight, by the way. He's bought the pay-per-view and he hopes he gets the win. Can't say I'm a massive UFC fan. I only catch the odd card. Generally, if there's a New Zealander fighting. Unga says, I believe they had NADA drug testing. I wonder how rigid and strict it was. I mean, if someone fails afterwards, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked. I don't think anyone would be. Dave says Joe Joyce will walk straight through Miller. Well, it's kind of like two guys who like to just throw and let their hands go, but the juggernaut is in shape and he'll keep coming. Miller showed tonight he's got a weakness that he's too heavy, and if he lets his hands go for an extended period, he is going to get tired. He took all of round 5 off basically to recover from his work in round 4. Freddie says Wilder is all talk. Didier says salute to you too. Hulk Mode says 300 pounds should be his limit. Well, 332 was just too heavy for Jarrell Miller. He had said he thought he'd be 325. Clearly the guy is not as dedicated to his training as he should be. I'm sure he's training quite hard, but he's got a mix that he can't out-train a bad diet. Adare says Jared Anderson versus Jarrell Miller would be fireworks. And who knows, maybe that will be something that could happen in the future. Not right now, but the whole battle of who's the real big baby. I've seen that narrative starting to crop up and people talk about that a little bit. I mean, but Jared Anderson would absolutely demolish Jarrell Miller, the version that we saw in there tonight. Might have been good enough to beat Lucas Browne and grind him down and get him out of there, but Jared Anderson is a different beast. Dave says, get the young baby Miller in there and beat up the drug cheat. Connor says, what did you think of Dakers versus Ismay? Sporting Icons got that one wrong. Well, I've seen the result, but I haven't seen the fight because I was watching this one. But, I mean, I was saying this was good matchmaking for Solomon Dakers. He would win. So, I mean, Sporting Icons knows the guy, so of course he was biased on that one. So I'm not surprised that Dakers won because they handpicked the guy. But I will be watching that and maybe doing a video. I've got to pop out in about 45 minutes. So stream probably go for another half an hour or so tops. We'll just see how it goes. Nathan says Miller Browne was an entertaining fight, played out kind of how I thought. Miller mid-round stoppage. I mean, the whole thing, I had no idea how it would actually play out because, you know, it's a bit circus. Who knew what was going to happen? Where was Browne at? Where was Miller at? You know, are they clean? You know, all those sorts of questions come into it. Glenn says he watched it live on YouTube. I did have a look to sort of see what was going around, but I had a lot of people sort of coming to me saying, where are you watching this? But I was watching it via ProBox. Jeffrey says, is Caroline Dubois allowed to fight Miller? I don't think she's a man, so probably not. and not a heavyweight. Marcus says 330 pounds is way too much if he steps up in competition. Exactly. He's going to have to be in much better shape, much better condition, but also when he gets to a certain level, there is going to be a lot stricter drug testing in place. And based off his past history, where he's across 3 different times failed about half a dozen drug tests, you know, there's history there. So if I was fighting him and I had a belt or I was highly ranked working for a big promoter, I would be having very strict drug testing in place because you can't trust the guy, clearly. Adore Pennant says Jarrell Miller versus Ali Aaron Demirjian would be fireworks. It would be if Demirjian was still boxing. He's announced that he stepped away from boxing, so I mentioned that in a heavyweight news and notes mashup video just the other day. For whatever reason, he had a video, but it was in Turkish, and I haven't seen anything in English floating around. But he stepped away, which is a shame because actually Miller versus Demirjian, that would be pretty well matched at this point. And that's maybe the sort of caliber of opponent that Miller kind of needs to work through the levels to get back to something, towards a world level. Nathan says Miller will be a tough out for a lot of guys up to a certain level, but he is too basic and easy to hit. But he has some attributes. And part of it too with Miller is the chin. If he didn't have a solid beard, he would have got beaten tonight because Lucas Browne did land clean on him a few times with right hands, and there were a couple of nice uppercuts. Didn't faze Miller. Whereas Lucas Browne a few times was backed up and, visibly winced to a couple of body shots. I mean, we know that his durability is sort of shot at this point. But if Miller was a bigger puncher as well, that could have ended things different here. But I think Miller does have that sort of come forward pressure style that he brings, or at least previously brought, was very hard to sort of guys to combat. I mean, you had someone like Gerald Washington just fold, but obviously with all the failed tests, you have to question some of those results. Ricky says Jarrell Miller versus Dillian Whyte in June at the O2. Let's go. Whyte's got no time for Miller, so I don't think he'd give him the payday. But I'm kind of interested in that. But at the same time, Whyte is washed. So I think that Miller would actually have a good shot at winning that fight. But with Dillian Whyte, who's criticised Miller, very hard in public, I don't think he'd be willing to give him the opportunity. Press conference would be must watch. Lucas Browne versus Trevor Bryan, give people what they want. I mean, who's to say that you couldn't have Jarrell Miller versus Trevor Bryan? They've got past beef. That would be interesting to some extent because, Bryan's on the comeback. I still think Miller would beat Trevor Bryan. Wayne says, was a fun little fight. I'm just going to have a little bit of water here. Flying Pan Man says, Miller versus Parker. Well, Parker's in a bit of a tough spot right now because does anyone really want to see Parker because he throws a lot of stinkers. He needs someone to be coming and just letting their hands go and giving him the opportunity to sort of counter, use speed and that sort of stuff, a la the second Chisora fight. But not many guys will do that. Even the version of Miller tonight would be probably the style matchup. You have just Parker letting his hands go and he doesn't have a lot of pop. It's probably not going to put a dent in Miller. And the way Parker fights, if he was boxing and moving, it's not going to be the same sort of fight as we saw with Browne and Miller. Browne was trying to go for broke and get Miller out of there, and Miller was doing that at times as well. That's why it was so fun. Miller versus Junior Farr, that's too big MF. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, Farr, given his knockout against Lucas Browne, he's got a bit of, of a ways to work his way back. Maybe you could see a Junior Farr versus Lucas Browne rematch. That's a possibility. Browne is promoted by Lou DiBella as is Junior Farr, so I guess we'll see. Maestro says, salute to the whole chat. Hit the like. Yes, please. That'd be much appreciated, either on the way in or the way out. Wherever you are, morning, noon, or night, thank you for joining this live stream. Much appreciated. MS says, I was listening to Miller's interview yesterday. He believes he should get a shot at the title or maybe against Ruiz. He's completely nuts. He's completely deluded. So fighting the likes of, you've got Cardenas, Bracamonte, and now Browne somehow means you deserve a shot at the title. I mean, the reality is Miller is going to be sitting around waiting and watching, and he's not going to get any of the big names that he wants. If it's Ruiz, if it's Dubois, if it's Joshua, he can call them out as much as he wants, but he lost his opportunity back in 2019. He's going to have to do something significant to put himself into position, force his way into position. That's why that Mahmoud Charr fight, which is kind of like this one, a little bit circus, it's probably quite viable and a good fallback option. And he probably beats him as well. Nathan says Charr just won't go away. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about him. Ethan says, have you seen that Dillian Whyte is rumoured to fight on June 10 against either McKean or Pulev? I mean, I could see it end up being Dempsey McKean. I mean, what value is there in Pulev at this point? He probably won't get a lot of credit for it. I mean, that's the same for McKean, who's relatively unproven in the scheme of things. But Kubrat Pulev and some of his performances, even since the Joshua fight, has actually looked like he's still got something in the tank. He handled Jerry Forrest, relatively well, and I think White is pretty washed. I mean, even McKean versus White is not exactly a lock for White, but if McKean won that, he could end up being the guy that could face Joshua after it, because Dillian Whyte was meant to get a shot at some point against Joshua in a rematch. I mean, if I was Dillian Whyte, why wouldn't you just wait for Joshua? Let Joshua fight him and then fight in September or whatever. Blue Collar Sports TV says, yeah, Miller versus White is one I'd like to see. It is, and the trash talk would be amazing. I'm just not sure that it's going to happen. I don't think White would. I don't think, especially, I mean, who's going to put that one on? Eddie Hearn's probably not going to be giving any charitable, fights or any charity Miller's way, given what happened. And if White is working with Matchroom, it's probably not going to happen. If it's another promoter, well, it could be, given White can move around, given his sort of fight by fight deal. Charr is about to be hit by Fresakendo levels. Nathan says they might wheel out Stavern for Miller. They've had beef as well. So, I mean, that could potentially happen. It's kind of like that scenario. Someone made a good joke after, was it Goudry beats Brian or whatever it was when it gets Stavern, and they just kind of do like a three-way tournament that just keeps revolving until the end of time. Maestro says Miller versus Anderson. If that was to happen, probably a year or two away. But does Top Rank want to work with Miller? Remembering, they were the ones putting on Miller versus Forrest. They gave Miller a chance, they signed him, and then he popped dirty back in 2020 and was banned for a year. I mean, I think given who he's worked with, Top Rank and Matchroom, and he's done the dirty and been caught, I don't know if they'll be willing to give him another shot. I think that's just a reality. Some of these fringe promoters like this Hardcore Boxing that put this event on in Dubai, it's those sorts, I think, that would potentially be willing to work with him. And he does have some name value. But, I mean, outside of, PBC is the only other sort of big entity in the US, or Frank Warren in the UK. I mean, who's going to take a chance on him? I mean, Joyce versus Miller is quite fun, but I don't think Miller's always been very disrespectful to Joe Joyce and said there's nothing in it. And Joyce's sort of commercial side of things, I'm not sure it's big enough to kind of get the sort of check that Miller is clearly looking for to cash out. Nathan says, a fun slugfest anyway with Miller and Browne. It was. Unger says, I thought it was a premature stoppage, although Dacre's clearly on top. So I haven't seen that fight. But, that guy Robert Ismay clearly was talking a big game ahead of the fight. And it was a case I thought it was always going to be good matchmaking for Dacres. Dave says, the real big baby, please stand up. Glenn says, it was a Russian site, excellent quality with Russian commentary. Okay. I mean, I almost wish that I had have watched that, because they had Floyd Mayweather on the comms with Ray Flores, and he didn't add a lot, and he often was referring to himself and stuff, that how awesome he was. There wasn't a lot of analysis about the actual fighters. So, yeah, make of it what you will. If you saw the commentary on Pro Box, what did you think of it? I thought they were very pro Miller as well. Obviously, there was a weird kind of narrative about coming back after 4 years of a ban. And actually, as I mentioned earlier, he wasn't banned for 4 years. In 2019, after all those tests, he just dropped out of the WBA rankings. Didn't hold a license with New York, so they couldn't ban him. He's only had 1 year of official banning, and that was from the Nevada State Athletic Commission, after the time that he failed ahead of the Jerry Forrest fight. L-Dub says, any word on Fury versus FA April 29th? Do you mean Usyk? I mean, I'm still hoping it's Usyk, but we're starting to get pretty late in the day for that undisputed fight. 19th of the 3rd, where I am at the moment. It'll be the 18th somewhere as well, at some point of the world at this stage. 29th of April, not long. So, Yeah, we'll see. Nathan says, seemed premature for Dakers, but okay. Top heavyweight boxing, Jarrell Miller is a force on the scene. This was an excellent rebuild fight. In terms of getting some name recognition, I think it was, and also, as he sort of alluded to in his post-fight comments, the first time that someone was really, in recent years, trying to put hands on him, because Browne was just unloading at points. John says, look like Hagler versus Hearns in a pie shop. The physics just don't add up. For either man to be clean, shouldn't have gone past 2 rounds. Well, I was thinking it's a couple of points. It did kind of, because no head movement or anything like that, no defense. It was, 2 homeless guys fighting over a wedge of cheese. It was entertaining though. Maestro says, hit the like button. Yes, please. That would be fantastic. I've just lost my place. Where was I? Okay, got it. Gaz says, just make the battle of the babies, Jarrell versus Anderson. Could be something we see in future, but is Top Rank willing to work with Miller? And he could be frozen out to some extent. And I think the only reason his current promoters, co-promoters, Greg Cohen and Dimitri Salita, are still working with him is they need to make their money back on the investment that they've put into Miller. I mean, as I alluded to before, you had Salita at one point taking Miller to court for, the loss of earnings through his actions. Force Ghost Fabio says, smash the like for Boxing Squared, show the love. Yes, please. That would be much appreciated. Dave says, I would have loved to have seen Miller versus Povetkin both in their best shape. Dave says, hit the like, people. Yes, please. Hungus Unger says, when Hooney making his Matchroom debut? It's an interesting question. I mean, I think with Justice Hooney, because he's still so young, I think Matchroom probably is going to be a bit more diligent with how they build him. They're not going to rush him. They're not going to have him fighting every couple of months because of the potential for injuries like he was, when he's promoted by Dean Lonergan. So, I mean, who knows? Adare says, Jarrell Miller versus Derek Chisora next would be interesting. I mean, Chisora should really retire. L-Dub says Charles Martin versus Lenia Pero. That could be something that happens. I mean, they're going to have to match Pero with some of those mid-tier heavyweights at PBC at some point. Gerald Washington, or actually, I'm not sure if he's with the PBC anymore. But where was I? Oh, there it is. It's successfully reconnected. Yeah, but of the fight, it was a slugfest at times. End of round 4, absolutely wild. Heavyweight position. Well, Charr's not even ranked. So when he came out and he was calling out Miller saying, we'll fight for the WBA heavyweight championship, Miller rightly said back to him, you're not even ranked. You do not have a belt. It was like when he fought Christopher Lovejoy, and even by then he'd been stripped by the WBA. He still said it was sort of promoted on the basis he was a WBA heavyweight champion, of which he's not. So Miller was right to call him out, and he called him out a few times on that. And Charr was sort of blowing up, going on about his fights with Klitschko and Povetkin, but we're talking 10 years ago, and he got battered in those. The clown just needs to go away. As soon as he was in the ring and he was on the periphery, I thought, this idiot is going to go up and call Miller out. But actually, where's Miller got to go next? This could make perfect sense, because maybe he's just as washed as Lucas Browne. He's still, Miller can stop him. The stoppages build a bit of momentum. I mean, if Browne had have gone on pretty good matchmaking. Special Cases Battle of the Big Babies is marketable. It could be, but I think Miller needs to rehabilitate his image to some extent. There probably needs to be a little bit more of a length between him failing that test while he was signed on a top rank, deal, and then actually going back, because, it left a bad taste in their mouth. I'm sure they took a chance on him after he'd failed those 3 tests a year or so earlier, and then it blew up in Top Rank's face. And Bob Arum was not very, didn't have kind words for Miller in his actions. And it just confirmed the guy can't help himself. The guy's a cheat, and he tried to put it on, was it Black Ant Magic? Tried to sort of say that, it was for his flaccid penis. He was trying to put some lead in the pencil. I mean, pull the other one. Marcus said, could we see Browne versus Jalalov both with Probellum? Well, the thing is, Probellum seems to have wrapped up on it, and it's been very quiet. I mean, at the end of the day, you've got Jalalov, who's promoted by Ludabella, Browne, who's promoted by Ludabella, so maybe it's possible. But it would have to be on a DeBella show, most likely in the US. So it's possible, but it could be a number of names like Junior Farr or Hemi O'Hill, could be for Jalalov. You've got, was it Mike Belligan is also, and George Arias also with DiBella. There's a whole bundle of names that DiBella's got and has been working with, but a lot of those names haven't been active. It's kind of like you've got DiBella, Salita, Greg Cohen. There's a few others, those sort of, middle tier type promoters who are relying on the guys with the bigger promoters with TV deals. So a lot of these guys are more inactive than they should be. Jalalov is losing momentum. He's just not fighting. Antonio says it's an entertaining fight in slow motion. It was fun. It was fun. I enjoyed it. Martin says Joyce vs. Miller would be fun. And the best thing was, if you already had a Pro Box subscription, it was free, effectively. I mean, I already paid for the year because it was only, I think it was $2 a month or something. And they've had some good cards recently. Some of the commentating wasn't so flash, and it was weird that they were trying to rewrite the Miller drug narrative, but it is what it is. Just trying to find my place again. Martin says Joyce vs. Miller would be fun. It would be. I mean, but who wants to take a chance on Miller at this moment? And he's got that infamy, and he'll play the villain, he'll be the heel, and all that sort of stuff. But does it sell? Miller's never been a huge name, a huge ticket seller, a guy that is going to shift pay-per-views. So that's kind of in his... I mean, we all know him and what's gone on, all that sort of stuff. But probably to most casuals, it'll be Jarrell who. He's kind of just an average B-side. You put him on the same par with a whole bundle of guys. Terry O'Conman says Miller is all-you-can-eat buffet for any top 20 heavyweight. I think at this point, if he's at 332 pounds, yeah, definitely. It wouldn't go well for him. We've got a whole number of letters. Says AJ would have taken a knee at the end of that round 4 exchange. He don't want this work. Why would he even consider that work? Why would Matchroom and Joshua even give Miller a sniff? Miller was saying that Hearn and Joshua needed to take Joshua's balls out of Hearn's pocket. Why would they even consider it? Miller had his opportunity and he messed it up. And he spent recent years, saying all sorts of things, try to explain away, oh yeah, the EPO and the HGH was in my system because of an elbow injury. Couldn't even explain the GW 1516 at the time. Tried to blame the other drug ban on, him being impotent and needing some lead in his pencil from a pill and all that sort of stuff. The guy is a cheat, and it's gonna be hard for him to get back with big promoters. He may be sort of working in obscurity for the next few years. People, unless he's ordered in something, people will probably give him the wide berth. I just think that's what's going to happen. So Charr Miller could be a lock. Adaray says, what about Vladimir Ivanov versus Lucas Browne? Would be interesting. Well, I think for Lucas Browne, I think he should retire. I mean, you think about all the punishment that he took tonight. Noting Miller's not a huge puncher, but he still put it on Browne. He landed a lot of big shots. I mean, how much more CTE does Lucas Browne need? When he's 60, he's probably going to be breathing and, eating through a straw at this rate. IBR Stella says, big up Boxing Squared, big up to you too. Special case is, at the end of the day, Miller took 6 rounds to do what an ex-pro leaguer did in 1. And that's an interesting way to look at it, because obviously rugby league player Paul Gallen, ex-rugby league player, blitzed Browne in a round. Browne complained bitterly at the time that rabbit punches were involved. But I think the thing is, Miller just doesn't have the same sort of pop that a lot of other fighters do. His shtick was to use pressure and volume and just grind you down. He's still trying to do that, but from what we've seen so far, it's not as effective. And if Browne had not have basically tired after a couple of rounds, he might have been able to do more with Miller because he was catching him. Terry O'Conman says, I can't stand AJ, but he would destroy Miller. Pre-ban Miller was significantly better. I think we know why. Ethan says, have you seen Lovejoy is fighting tomorrow in Egypt? I've seen that. I'm not covering Lovejoy anymore. He's clearly a joker. I mean, that fight against Antonio Zepeda on the Mayweather card recently, it was a joke. It was an exhibition. It wasn't on his box record and all that sort of stuff. He effectively took a dive. So, he might be able to go through this journeyman, but Lovejoy, I think the grift is almost over now. And I talked about this on Patreon in the week of or just after about that fight and that dive against Zepeda. Who wants to see him in against Johnny Fisher now that effectively, you know, he's phantom punches and just falling to the canvas, which is kind of what happened against Charr. He gave it very easily. So I think, you know, he goes on and says, look, I'm coming to take these big paydays and all that sort of stuff, and he's used his mouth to grift a living in boxing. But we don't need to see it anymore, I don't think. I've got no desire to see Lovejoy versus anyone who's got half a pulse. Ronan says, I wonder if Miller ends up with Don King. I mean, you never know. Miller, well, I guess the thing is, he's already got promoters, Greg Cohen and Dimitri Salita. And Miller will need to, so they'll be getting a cut no matter what. But maybe they could work with Don King to put Miller on a King card. It's a possibility. Miller versus Trevor Bryan, they had some beef that was, at least in the boxing sphere, got a bit of traction. Was it about 5 or 6 years ago? Jason says, please retire Mr. Browne for the good of your health. Liam says Fury will fight Miller next. I mean, with Tyson Fury, who knows? If he's not fighting Usyk, I mean, I would hope it would be Joe Joyce, you know, or someone of that ilk that you like, a true test. But you've got Joyce coming up in April 15 against Young, so it's not going to be him for the 29th. I mean, maybe they would be able to pull it. I mean, I don't know. We'll have to see. But I think there's a whole bundle of names that would jump at the opportunity and snap Frank Warren's hand off to face Tyson Fury for a shot at the belt. Liam says, good to see the lives back at Boxing Squared. Well, I was going to do a video, and then I was like, no, it was an interesting fight. It was a fun fight. There was all sorts of comments, the randomness of Charr coming in after the fact, claiming to give, you know, saying, I will give you a WBA title shot, even though he doesn't hold a ranking or doesn't hold a belt. He was stripped of it. I mean, Charr's clearly living in delusion. I mean, that's clear. But it was a fun fight, action-packed. I mean, it kind of exceeded expectations. I had no idea what was going to happen in there. In the end, it kind of delivered. The light punching Miller, putting it on Browne. Browne having some success of his own, you know, good trading, back and forth action. Ultimately, Browne getting worn down and taken out. I mean, that series of, I think it was about 7 or 8 right hands to drop Browne in that 6th round. I mean, it was pretty impressive action. Forsco's Fabio says Lovejoy took a dive versus a bum. Well, I mean, Antonio Zepeda, he's a prospect. He's not a bum, but he is an unknown prospect, and he's kind of a 2nd or 3rd tier type prospect. He's just not well known. I mean, Lovejoy claimed to get $100,000 for it, but if you saw that event and how no one was in the audience, I don't know how they're going to be paying anyone. I hope Lovejoy got his money up front. Forsco's Fabio says, wait, Lovejoy, we just went that one. Miller versus Takam. Well, if Hardcore Boxing Promotions is going to put Miller versus Browne, a random fight in the Middle East, Takam versus Miller, if they've got the money, they want to put it up, who knows what could happen. That would be fun, that would be entertaining, and that would also be a significant step up from Lucas Browne, given the recent performances of Carlos Takam. He's still a guy who's sort of in that top 20 to top 30 range. Miller, who knows where he's at the moment. Teddy B says, such a fun fight. Yeah. Rosie says, Fury knows he cannot beat Usyk, so he's being spiteful and holding the WBC belt hostage from him. Who is Usyk's mandatory? Well, the WBA is next in the sort of rotation, and it is Daniel Dubois. But with Dubois being injured, who knows what could happen. Might be a case he wouldn't be ready for an Usyk fight, or at least I'm sure Frank Warren would try to push it out as far as possible in the year, because if it was meant to happen mid-year, I don't think Dubois would be ready. JR says, hit the like button, people. Rosie says, Hrgovic and Dubois are Usyk's mandatories. And Hrgovic has sort of said, look, if Fury doesn't face you, I will step in, I will fight you, Alexander Usyk. Wouldn't mind seeing that. I do think with Hrgovic trying to sort of just be a power puncher and looking a bit stiff in there, Usyk would really be trying to box rings around him. It would be an interesting style matchup, because if Hrgovic caught him, though, Usyk could be in trouble. But I think people would favour Usyk in that one for sure. Adere says Jarrell Miller versus Frank Sanchez would be good. Do we see PBC working with Jarrell Miller and his promoters? I'm not so sure. I think we might see Miller turning up on these random cards. All his comeback fights have been on random cards in different parts. Was it Argentina? There was one in the United States, and now Dubai. I think he's going to have to be a road warrior and take what he can get. So he'll be calling everyone out. He'll be saying everyone's ducking him, all that sort of stuff. But he's in the who needs him club. Who wants to work with a guy who's been proven 3 different times in his career, 3 different separate times, to be a drug cheat? You know, I mean, it's going to be hard for Miller and his people to sort of get in position to get the fights that he wants. But a Mahmoud Charr fight, Charr coming in saying, like, fight me. And Charr was accusing Miller of ducking him when Miller was going out of the ring. I mean, that just could be the fight that's the sort of best, you know, closest option that makes a bit of sense, especially if the money's okay. Maybe Miller versus Varleen, both promoted by Salita, would be a decent crossroads fight. Maybe the winner gets Joshua or something like that. Problem being, and I did a video on this a little while ago, Dimitri Salita, his stable, he co-promotes Miller with Greg Cohen, but Salita's also got Otto Varleen. He's also got Jermaine Franklin, and there's a few others, Gunnar Colbein Christensen, 1 or 2 others as well. It's almost like he's a B-side for hire operation. He is not matching his fighters with each other. He's hanging around waiting and watching for opportunities to feed guys to bigger promoters for big fights, for big paydays. I mean, Jermaine Franklin sat around for 3 years not doing much at all. Got an opportunity versus Dillian White, and now it's turned into 2 opportunities. Sometimes the sitting around and waiting, it works, but most of the time it just leads to horrendous inactivity and guys rotting on the vine, like Otto Varleen is rotting on the vine right now. It seems that Salita is unwilling to match his own heavyweights with each other. Just doesn't seem to want to do that. I think Abdi Dovtaev is also another Salita heavyweight. There's 1 or 2 others as well, but I don't think they want to do that. They will match them out against other guys, especially big promoters with big shows, but not against each other, because they're burning off potential options. But let's face it, I mean, Otto Varleen versus Jermaine Franklin, especially if you're trying to push guys to a title, that fight kind of made sense the last year or 2, because then you could kind of go, well, the winner is kind of deserving of a big fight. But at the moment, everyone's just sort of sitting around waiting and watching, and Salita's at the heart of that with his own fighters, just hoping someone's going to put their hand out. You know, they've got the begging bowl out saying B-side for hire, and that someone's going to give them an opportunity. So now that my little rant is concluded, I'll get back to the chat here. So Kiki Toa needs a big fight. What a waste of potential. Well, he could be a guy that ends up, you know, having some decent other fights with sort of New Zealand and Australian fighters. Hemi Ahil versus Kiki Toa Leteli, Kiki versus Junior Farr, Kiki versus Lucas Browne, some of those other Australian guys. He obviously put up a really credible performance against Justice Hooney, but I just kind of feel that he's going to be a regional guy and no more. Maybe he might get pulled into as a B-side for some far-flung sort of fight around the place, but probably that's really his lot, unfortunately. I don't know who manages him, who promotes him, but I'm just not sure that he's going to get the opportunities that perhaps he does deserve. He put in a really good performance against Dempsey McKean. People forget that. There were people saying that he won that fight, and now you've got Dempsey McKean on a Matchroom deal, and you've also got Dempsey McKean at one point was in the discussion for a Joshua fight. Someone was mentioning Dillian White earlier. So if he had won that fight, it could have all been different, but sometimes it's about timing and opportunity. Waylo says, would that mean he gets a voluntary or have another mandatory from one of the other organizations? You mean Usyk? So if there's no Fury undisputed, the WBA will order him to face someone. Daniel Dubois first, but if Dubois is not ready because he's injured, they might say, well, actually, we're putting, Dubois to the side. We're going to order you to face Michael Hunter or Martin Bacoli, whoever the next, best in the list is. So it could be something like that. Or perhaps they will go, our mandatory's not ready. We'll go after the IBF, and it could be Filip Hrgović. So Adore says, what about Jarrell Miller versus Oscar Rivas? Well, Rivas is out injured, detached retina. We may not ever see him again. Persistent eye injuries, and he's been at Bridgerweight anyway. So, we'll see. Eddie says, Miller versus Dubois, who wins? It's an interesting fight because the more we see of Dubois, the more that he looks a bit frail in some respects. That it's clear that he's an on-top fighter, and when he's not on top, someone's putting it on him. Anything can happen. But I'm just not so sure it gets made. Miller versus Brazil. With Brazil still with the PBC and still fighting, I'm not sure if PBC will work with Miller. Luke says Miller versus Jared Anderson, battle of the big babies. Well, I guess it would be for who is the real big baby. Rosie says Valine is terrible. He overreaches his punches, so his back foot lifts off the canvas, yet he was able to turn Tyson Fury's face into a butcher's shop window display. We landed a few shots earlier, but he's dined off the credit of that fight for years now. I'll just take a sip of water. But what's he really done since then? He's beaten Brazil, but that's about it. He did not look very good in that random fight that he had in a card. I think it was in the Boston area just recently. Can't even remember the opponent who it was, but I did cover it on the channel. But just waiting around, having a fight, maintaining rankings, hoping someone's going to be charitable and throw out a bone. Like I say, Dimitri Salita's kind of run this B-side for hire, almost. It's the almost like pimping his guys out. Unga says, Gaz, you can't just get fight cards down under. Only No Limit has a TV deal. Matchroom have done nothing, and there are no other TV avenues. Force Goes Fabio says, I agree, Valine isn't that good. He needs a new trainer, but he stalled out. I think as well, what doesn't help, the inactivity. It's just almost like when he has a tune-up, it's like just getting those rounds in there just to try to get him a bit sharp again. But it's this repetitive process of nothingness against nobodies. Unga says a few cards on BN Sports, but not sure if they get much of a budget from the broadcaster. Terrio Conman says Hrgovic a tiny chance, but of those WBA guys are going to be toast. Usyk going to take all of that frustration out on them if Fury completes the likely duck the way things are looking. Well, Martin McCauley, he could be, I think, is he number one at the moment in the WBA? He's been talking about that he stopped Alexander Usyk in training, so he's heavy-handed, he's dangerous, he can keep things long. That'd be an interesting fight, but there's no money in that. Martin McCauley, doesn't bring fans. It's just, very low profile with the public, the boxing public in general. There's no call for that fight apart from Billy Nelson and Martin Piccoli, although I think it's actually a decent fight. The Bombster says Dubois is just getting ready to be fully exposed. Could happen. Tyree says Big Baby call out Jared just to fight an ancient artifact. The Bombers, if Valine has success with Fury, it stands to reason Usyk will be more than a handful. Yeah, it's a good fight. Valine is kind of Usyk light. Usyk is a far better fighter than Otto Valine, who's dined out on, cutting Fury with a couple of punches. People forget. Fury adapted. He made it ugly. He fought a different fight than he normally would have because of the cut to the eye. And he still comfortably won that fight in the end. Rosie says, someone else, talking to someone else. Adare says, what about Lucas Browne versus Toyosi Voisu Utu or Jackson Murray? I think you've got Browne. He's looking for money fights. He obviously got paid a certain amount here where he was willing to travel for it because it made sense. He's not going to be fighting up-and-coming prospects unless there's big money on the line. Would he face Justice Hooney? Sure he would, because I'm sure Matchroom would put money into that. But he's not going to be probably fighting anyone that's, unless he's getting a certain amount of money in Australia. Otherwise, he'll just, live off the credit of his name to try and get these final paydays that he's clearly seeking. Is Piccoli rotting on the vine also, not getting any big fights? Yeah, he is to some extent. He is fighting Igor Shevadutsky coming up in April, but I was hoping it'd be better. He would have been out of the ring for basically a year by that point. Shevadutsky is a sort of, pretty compact guy, pretty broad and stocky, a bit squat. It'll probably go some rounds, but Piccoli wins. Unga says Fury was too light for Valine. It was his last with boxer-sized Ben. Browne brought the heat. He should get credit. Yeah, he put in for him, he's pretty seasoned at this point, 43 years old. He was game. And, after the round 4 where he took a beating, it was good to see him come out in round 5 with ambition. And he won that round, for me. Miller basically didn't throw any shots for the first 2 minutes. Anyway, it's 12 20 past 11 where I am. I've got to be somewhere in about 40 minutes, so I will wrap this one up. So thank you for joining me again for a Boxing Squared live stream. So wherever you are, morning, noon, or night, I thank you. And if you're listening on archive, thank you also. But also, if you could smash that like button,